Imagine you're running a rapidly growing nation of over 1 billion people. You've got a massive, defining question staring you down. How on earth do you fuel this immense economic expansion without bankrupting yourself on imported oil or, destroying the planet in the process? Well, let's get into it. Today, we're breaking down India's green push. And listen, this is not just about planting a few trees. This is a hard-nosed, strategic master plan aimed at total energy independence. We're going to look at the exact policies, the wild scientific leaps, and the financial architecture that are fundamentally rewiring how an entire subcontinent powers itself.
To really understand why this shift is happening so aggressively right now, you just need to look at this one number: 1,30,000 crore rupees. That is the jaw-dropping amount of foreign exchange India could save every single year just by cutting fossil fuel imports. I mean, right now, India spends an absolute fortune buying energy from abroad. So this number, it's the core economic trigger for this entire green energy transition. The goal here isn't just to be eco-friendly, it's about absolute economic and geopolitical survival. When you're talking about keeping that much capital inside the country every single year, going green isn't just an ideal anymore, it's an absolute imperative.
So, here's how we're going to break this down today. First, the immediate fix, ethanol. Then the futuristic leap into hydrogen. Next, we'll see how exactly they're financing this massive shift with green bonds. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a quick mastery recap.
Okay, let's dive into that first big move, the ethanol roadmap.
Look, we need a short-term solution to cut down petrol imports right now. We obviously can't replace every single car engine overnight, right? So the strategy is to change the fuel itself. This is the Ethanol Blending Programme, and what's wild is how fast this timeline is moving. The initial goal was E10, meaning petrol mixed with 10% ethanol. Well, that target wasn't just met, they actually smashed it ahead of schedule. Because it works so well, the government got really aggressive and pulled the target for E20, a 20% blend, way forward. It was originally supposed to happen by 2030, but now the full E20 rollout is set for April 2025. It is literally a logistical sprint to cut those import bills as fast as possible.
Now, what's brilliantly strategic here is how this solves two massive problems at once. On the economic side, hitting that E20 mark saves about 30,000 crores a year in foreign exchange. But check out the agricultural impact. Ethanol is made from crops, so by demanding billions of liters of ethanol, the policy suddenly creates this massive, guaranteed market for farmers. It incentivizes sugarcane procurement, and crucially, it pushes for water-efficient crops like maize, or even using damaged food grains. It's a real game changer because it's an energy policy that secretly acts as a huge rural income booster.
But hold on, we have to look at the flip side here, because there are some very real engineering headaches. Actually, ethanol has a lower energy density than pure petrol. So when you blend 20% of it into the mix, a standard car is going to see a 6 to 7% drop in fuel efficiency. Plus, ethanol is naturally corrosive. You absolutely cannot just pour E20 into an older car and hope for the best. Your engine will basically melt. It requires totally redesigned fuel systems and brand new rubber and plastic parts. So yes, the economic and farm benefits are huge, but the entire auto industry basically has to completely re-engineer the internal combustion engine by 2025 to make it work.
All right, so that's the short-term fix. But now let's talk about the futuristic leap, the National Green Hydrogen Mission. See, ethanol is great for the cars of today, but it is not going to power a massive steel plant or an oil refinery. For those heavy, hard-to-abate sectors, we need a massive technological jump. But before we get ahead of ourselves, what actually is green hydrogen? Because how you make it changes the whole game. Hydrogen itself is super clean, but if you make it using fossil fuels, it's called gray hydrogen. If you use fossil fuels but somehow capture the carbon emissions, that's blue hydrogen. But green hydrogen, that is the holy grail. It's made by splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen using a machine called an electrolyzer. And the absolute key here is that this electrolyzer is powered 100% by renewable energy, zero carbon emissions from start to finish. A really helpful way to think about hydrogen is to picture a giant invisible battery. Hydrogen is an energy carrier. It's not a primary energy source. You can't go mine it like coal or drill for it like oil. You have to create it. It just stores energy generated somewhere else so you can transport it and use it later, either by burning it directly or running it through a fuel cell. And because it takes energy to make this energy, producing green hydrogen requires an absolutely staggering amount of external clean power. To actually make this a reality by 2030, the mission has set some truly mind-boggling targets. They want to produce 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen every single year. To power the electrolyzers for that kind of output, the country needs to add 125 gigawatts of brand new renewable energy capacity. Just let that scale sink in for a second.
To kickstart this whole ecosystem, the government has laid out a financial outlay of 19,744 crore. But don't just think of this as an expense, think of it as a multi-billion-dollar down payment on long-term geopolitical and energy independence. If you pop the hold on that budget, you see exactly where the real priorities are. 17,490 crore rupees. Basically, the vast majority of the mission's funding is set aside for one specific thing, the SIT program. That stands for Strategic Interventions for Green Hydrogen Transition. It's essentially a massive financial mechanism designed to directly subsidize and incentivize companies to domestically manufacture those electrolyzers and actually produce the hydrogen itself.
So why the massive subsidies? Well, it comes down to a brutal economic reality. Right now, green hydrogen is just not commercially competitive at all. It costs around 350 to 400 rupees to make just 1 single kilogram in India. For giant industries like fertilizers or steel to actually ditch cheap fossil fuels and switch over, that cost literally has to crash to under 100 rupees per kilogram. Slashing that production cost through massive scale and innovation, that is the central make-or-break objective of this entire mission.
And that brings us to the biggest roadblocks, famously known as the 4Es challenge. First up, electrolyzers. Domestic manufacturing is barely off the ground, and it relies on some really hard-to-get critical minerals. Second, energy source. Remember that 125 gigawatts of new renewables we need? That is nearly 3/4 of India's entire current installed renewable capacity. It requires insane amounts of land and huge grid upgrades. Third, end use. Every single time you convert electricity to hydrogen and then back again, you lose energy, and that kills your economic efficiency. And fourth, endogenous resources. Hydrogen is highly combustible, so navigating the safety standards and building the infrastructure to store and move it is wildly expensive. It is a monumental puzzle to solve.
Okay, so we've got an ambitious ethanol rollout and a futuristic hydrogen mission. Now for the elephant in the room. How do we finance this shift?
How does a developing nation actually pay for these colossal leaps in technology and infrastructure? Because you're not going to just find that kind of cash lying around in a standard tax budget. Enter sovereign green bonds, or SGRBs. This is the financial glue holding it all together. Issued for the very first time by the Reserve Bank of India, these instruments raised a massive 16,000 crore, split into 5-year and 10-year tenors. By issuing these bonds, the government is basically directly plugging global capital markets and eco-conscious investors straight into its domestic environmental targets. It's a dedicated pipeline of money, legally mandated to help slash the emission intensity of the country's GDP by 45% by 2030.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where that cash goes. The money raised from these bonds doesn't just sit in some random government account. It is strictly channeled right into sustainable development. It's funding the massive solar and wind farms needed for those green hydrogen electrolyzers. It's paying for clean transportation, like building out the infrastructure for the new E20 ethanol cars and EVs. Basically, it's taking high-level financial markets and hardwiring them directly to the physical hardware needed for this green transition.
All right, let's bring it all together and lock this in with a quick mastery recap. We've covered a ton of ground today, from the farm to advanced chemistry to high finance. Let's do a rapid-fire review of these core memory anchors. Number 1, the ethanol E20 target was aggressively pulled forward to 2025. It cuts import bills and boosts farm incomes at the same time. Number 2, the SITS program. That's the 17,490 crore rupee financial engine driving green hydrogen. Number 3, the 4Es challenge standing in hydrogen's way: electrolyzers, energy scale, end-use efficiency, and indigenous resources. And finally, sovereign green bonds, the RBI's 16,000 crore financial instrument that's actually paying for all this.
So this whole interconnected strategy leaves us with one massive defining question. The policies are locked in, the initial capital is raised, and the targets are set. But can a rapidly growing nation actually scale up its complex domestic manufacturing and fundamentally rebuild its entire power grid fast enough to conquer those 4E challenges? Crashing the price of green hydrogen by 2030 is not just a climate goal anymore, it is the ultimate test of national execution. Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Keep analyzing the systems around you, and I'll catch you in the next one.